So Marco Rubio met yesterday with the leaders of the Gulf states to talk about what's going on with Iran, talk about the negotiations. They issued a joint statement after the meeting. And then Marco Rubio stood in front of the media and spoke for a while. And what we're going to do in this video is we're going to play a number of clips of Marco Rubio speaking at this press conference and comment on them. We haven't heard a lot from the Secretary of State over the last few weeks. As we've all noticed, Vice President J.D. Vance has been the lead man in the negotiations with Iran, and he's been really the one doing more of the media. And a lot of people have commented that Secretary of State Rubio has kind of gone quiet. But he was sent to Bahrain to meet with the leaders of the Gulf states and to hear them out and to exchange ideas with them, and they issued this joint statement. So there's a lot in this press conference that Marco Rubio, in his press statements, there's a lot in there. He said a lot of things that really come off sounding different than what we've been hearing from Vice President Vance and even from President Trump over the last little while, and just notable things. So I want to go through all of this in this video. Okay, so let's start with the joint statement that they issued after the GCC meeting. This is from the State Department. Joint statement following the ministerial meeting of the United States and the Gulf Cooperation Council, and it talks about who was there. And I don't want to read the whole thing, but there's some key things here. This is the key paragraph, one of them. Secretary Rubio reinforced the enduring U.S. commitment to GCC security, and the ministers reaffirmed their strong commitment to the U.S.-GCC strategic partnership. The ministers welcomed the June 17th MOU between the United States and Iran, recognized the important roles played by Pakistan and Qatar. They stressed the need to maintain momentum and unity as negotiations proceed toward a more permanent end to hostilities and the shared objective of preventing Iran from ever developing or otherwise acquiring a nuclear weapon. Here we go. This is big, this next sentence. The ministers further emphasized that lasting regional peace and security requires the full spectrum, addressing the full spectrum of Iran's threats, including its ballistic missiles, drones, and support of proxies in the region. This is, when you read between the lines in these things, now you know what this meeting was really about. Because the MOU did not talk about the ballistic missiles. It did not talk about the drones. It did not talk about the proxies. In fact, it even kind of gave some legitimacy to Iran's proxy Hezbollah in there, talking about this deconfliction mechanism that Iran's going to be a part of in Lebanon, but it didn't address them. The key is that it did not address them. So here you see, by the fact that this is in here, it says that they support the MOU, but you can't really deal with the Iran issue unless you deal with these threats. When it's reading between the lines, this was an issue for the Gulf states, saying, hey, you're moving forward with this MOU. You haven't really consulted us. And these are big issues that need to be dealt with. Okay. And that's big because according to the Iranians, these issues are not part of the negotiations. And when you read the 14-point MOU, they kind of have a point. All it discusses really is lifting sanctions, unfreezing assets, opening the Strait of Hormuz, the nuclear issue. Those are the things discussed there. We've talked about that. The ministers also emphasized the importance of reopening the Strait of Hormuz, noting that free, unconditional, and unrestricted navigation, including the right of transit passage as guaranteed under international law, remains essential to regional and global security. The ministers rejected any tolls, fees, or attempts to assert control over the strait. Not just tolls and fees, but any attempt to assert control over the strait. The MOU specifically names Oman and Iran as saying that they will have conversations about setting up the mechanisms and setting up the rules of the game for the Strait of Hormuz. So this is also very interesting pushback. And welcomed the Sultanate of Oman and the International Maritime Organization's announcement on the launch of an evacuation plan for over 11,000 seafarers stranded in the region. The ministers further emphasized that any trade and investment with Iran is conditional and reversible, meaning we're not just giving money to Iran. No. contingent on Iran's compliance with the MOU and the final deal's cessation of its destabilizing behavior. Not just about the nuclear. It's not about nuclear in Hormuz. It's about their destabilizing behavior and creation of the conditions necessary for economic engagement. Now, this document then goes on. It mentions Syria. It mentions Lebanon, that they reaffirm a full commitment to Lebanon's sovereignty, security, stability, and territorial integrity. Very nice. And they welcome the negotiations between Israel and Lebanon, facilitated by the United States. But check this out. They stress that full Lebanese sovereignty cannot be achieved while non-state armed groups maintain military capabilities outside the Lebanese state authority, and called for the full disarmament of all such groups, namely Hezbollah, and the restoration of Lebanese state's monopoly of force, while recognizing the importance of supporting the Lebanese armed forces in doing so. In other words, they are coming out in favor of the disarming of Hezbollah. Okay, and then it talks about Gaza, how they still support that. They have to throw that in there. And they also condemned attacks by the Iranian proxies in Iraq against GCC countries, throwing in more about the proxies. Okay, let's get to the clips. So the first couple of clips I'm going to play you, and these clips are from different parts of the press conference, because he was asked questions on a topic, they go to another topic, they come back to a topic. So I put them together more topically. They're not in order of how they appeared in the press conference. So the first couple of clips I'm going to play you are both on the topic of the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so let's take a look at those two first. And do I have it? Here we go.
So one thing that came across very clear is there is zero support among the Gulf countries for any sort of toll or fees or anything that charges for the use of international waters. The president's made it clear that's not going to happen. It's not going to be a part of this. It cannot be a part of this. He made that clear again yesterday in the Oval Office in a press availability that he had, and I reiterated that point, which I think was a welcome message from our partners here to hear that.
Okay, that's number one, meaning we're not going to tolerate any tolls whatsoever in the Strait of Hormuz. Very nice. And then he came back to this when he was asked about Oman and their involvement, because apparently the Omanis are having conversations with the Iranians, and so it's kind of ambiguous, right? What's the deal with Oman? And here's what he had to say there.
Thank you. What is your comment on the Iranian-Omani dispute regarding the safe passage in the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, so we've reached the point now in this where you're hearing, for example, the Iranians will say one thing, but then something else is actually happening. So here's what I would tell everybody. It's now obvious to us, and I think should be obvious to all of you, that the Iranian system is going to continue to produce all sorts of maximalist rhetoric. They're going to have people going on their TV, on their official media, and making all kinds of pronouncements. But what we're interested in is not their press conferences. What we're interested in is whether or not ships are moving. If ships are moving as they should be moving, then that's what we're going to judge, and that's what we're going to react to. If, on the other hand, this rhetoric is backed up by actual ships being threatened and ships are not moving, that's a violation of the agreement, and we're going to have a problem with it. So what we are watching is we see the continued flow of ships. In this particular case, that lane is the one that's being used for this evacuation effort that's being led by the International Maritime Organization, and that must continue. And as long as it continues, they can have all the press conferences they want. If that stops, then we're going to have a problem.
Mr. Secretary, from Oman that there would be no fee or tolling system imposed, including after a specific commitment from Oman that there was zero interest in a tolling or fee system, including after the 60-day negotiation.
I don't know if it's been issued yet, but we have a joint statement that's coming from our meeting, and it makes it abundantly clear. And so I would just reiterate the point that I made earlier. And I said this, I don't know if you guys were there in the...
His point there is that Oman was part of the meeting, so they agreed to the joint statement that I read you before.
Open portion of it, I said fees and tolls are the same thing to me. Okay, if you're paying someone to go there, I don't care if you call it a fee or a toll or a donation, it's a toll. That's how we're going to define it. That's international waterway. There isn't a nation on earth that supports having to pay money to go through the straits. And think about it this way. If you have, first, it's not even workable. Let's suppose that we went crazy and lost our minds completely and decided to agree to have a tolling or a fee mechanism. How would that work? It's not doable, because what's the consequence for not paying? Let's say a ship says, well, I'm not going to pay the fee. It's not like a toll on a road. You don't get a ticket in the mail. They get shot at. You shoot at one ship, you sink one ship, no other ship is going to move. So that sort of system is not only unwise, it can't happen, it's not even workable. So you might as well abandon the fantasy now. So I think we've been clear. You can call it a fee, you can call it a toll, call it whatever you want. If you are charging money to use the Straits, we won't support it, we won't tolerate it, we won't allow it. And I think there was unanimity in that.
Okay, the problem with this, I'm happy he's saying that, but the problem with it is that, again, the MOU actually, explicitly states that Iran will not charge any fees for the first 60 days. That implies that it's a possibility down the road. But here he's, and President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio have said very clearly since then, no, there's never going to be any fees. So this is going to be an issue that is going to come to a head. Now, the next topic that I want to share with you his remarks on has to do with the proxies. Okay, because as I read to you in that joint statement that they put out, it talked about the proxies, talked about the importance of getting rid of the proxies. And here he says something that is very curious to me. Check this out. So we are looking at, hold on, let me find the right clip. It's this clip here. Here we go.
Your remarks this morning, sir, you said there is no agreement with Iran. It will come at an expense of a Gulf state interest. Does that mean in your negotiation with Iran, it will address proxy and also all the threats from Iran coming to Hormuz, even if they don't close it, but still the threats affect the maritime traffic and also proxies?
Yeah, if you look at the MOU, it talks for peace in the region. It talks for no interference in the sovereignty or interest of independent countries, of sovereign countries. Well, that's what proxies are. They're interfering.
Okay, I have to cut him off here. This is when I watched this full press conference, this was the first moment where I was like, what did you just say? Let me play it again. So you understand what he just said here. Let's back up a few sentences.
In your negotiation with Iran, it will address proxy and also all the threats from Iran coming to Hormuz, even if they don't close it, but still the threats affect the maritime traffic and also proxies.
Yeah, if you look at the MOU, it talks for peace in the region. It talks for no interference in the sovereignty or interest of independent countries, of sovereign countries. Well, that's.
I read through the MOU again after I saw this. There is nothing in the MOU about not interfering with the sovereignty of other countries in the region. There is nothing there. The closest thing to it is that it says that the US and Iran agree to not interfere in each other's sovereignty. There's nothing like what he's saying here. It's a little confusing to me, but let's see what else he says.
That's what proxies are. They're interfering in the sovereignty of a country. When you're giving money, for example, to Hezbollah to act as a rival to the sovereign government of Lebanon, you're interfering in their politics. When you're sponsoring militias in Iraq, you're interfering in Iraq. When you're sponsoring, Hamas or the Houthis or whoever it may be, you're interfering in the sovereignty of these countries. So that it's covered. The MOU contemplates a conversation about these things because it's critical and it's important. So there's no doubt that will be a topic that has to be discussed, because ultimately you're not going to have peace and stability in this region as long as there are non-state actors operating within the boundaries and borders of sovereign countries and being funded by Iran.
Okay. Again, I just said my piece on it. I could not find this anywhere in the MOU. There's nothing even about it. It doesn't say anything about not interfering in other countries. And he says it's in there. Okay. So maybe drop a comment. If you want to go back and read the 14-point MOU, you can find it easily. Just Google Iran, US MOU 14 points or something, and it'll come up. There's a number of news outlets that publish the full text. If someone has an idea of how this is actually there, help me out here. But it's nice to see the proxy issue back at the forefront. One of our biggest issues with this MOU and all this stuff that's been happening lately is, whoa. What happened with the ballistic missiles? What happened with the proxies? What happened with those major issues that used to be part of our goals here? All we're talking about is Hormuz and the nuclear issue. And here he's adamantly saying that, no, of course, the proxies are going to be part of it. He's also coming out of a meeting with the Gulf states. And we saw from their document that they came out with that this is right at the top of the list for them. They want to deal with the destabilizing aspects of the Iranian regime. And they talk specifically about the fact that it's not sufficient to just deal with the opening the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear issue, that you can't deal with the Iran issue without dealing with the proxies. He comes back to the proxies near the end of the press conference. I'm going to play you one more clip on this topic. Okay, let's find it. It is this one.
I'm just curious how concerned you are about Iran being able to consolidate control over a lot of its proxy militias in Iraq. And even as these talks are ongoing, what type of future threat that poses to some of
Well,
its
again,
neighbors?
that's an example of Iranian interference in the sovereign affairs of another country in Iraq. That said, they have a new prime minister. He's forming a government. We have good signals coming from him. He'll be visiting Washington soon to meet with the president. And our hope is that, we will continue to stand on behalf of the sovereignty, respect for the sovereignty of the people of Iraq, and not interference from Iran. So that'll be a topic of conversation. We've engaged the new prime minister. He's spoken to the president on the phone already once. We're watching so far, there's been good signals and some good actions that he's taken in the formation of his government, but obviously some challenges remain. But it's something we're going to watch very closely.
Okay. Okay, we're watching closely. We don't want the destabilizing influence of Iran in Iraq. The problem is that the Iraqi government is actually pretty pro-Iran, so we'll see how that one shakes out. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that one now. I'm probably going to make a separate video about Iraq. We need to revisit that topic. It's a very confusing one. And let's go to the next topic. The next topic he deals with, that I want to deal with, is he was asked about the frozen assets and whether any of the money has already been transferred, because there's rumors that Qatar has kind of jumped the gun and has already been releasing frozen assets. So let's take a look at this clip here.
Supportive of Venezuela.
And then secondly, are you aware, has any, or are you aware of any of the frozen money that Qatar holds being transferred already to Iran?
Well, I'm not aware of that. I don't think anyone in our system has said that. So I don't know if you're responding to some news or anything that's out there, but as of right now, we're not aware of any money, nor have we agreed for any money to be transferred.
Okay, so that all that money is still there?
As far as, that's our understanding. And there's no agreement on that point, so that better be the case.
He says there's no agreement on that point. Again, when I go back to the MOU lists 5 items that have to be done immediately in order to proceed. That's clause 13. It lists 5 items, and one of the items that has to proceed immediately is the unfreezing of Iranian assets. So he's saying here that that it's not time for that yet. Along the same lines as the unfrozen assets, because it's in the financial realm, he then was asked about the $300 billion fund, the famous $300 billion fund. I made a video about it last week, about a week ago today, I think, about how I don't believe it's ever going to come to be. And his comment on it kind of confirmed what I said here. So let's take a look. This is a short one.
Mr. Secretary, in the meeting with the GCC allies, did any of them make any commitments to pay into this $300 billion reconstruction?
No, it was not discussed. I mean, the reconstruction cost, that's way down the road, and that's something, that'll be dealt with at the appropriate time in this process. But that was not discussed by anybody.
Right, because besides the fact that they're not supposed to pay into it anyway, we were told that it is meant to be private investment. But we were also told by J.D. Vance that there's lots of interest in the Arab world in investing in Iran. And then we saw a lot of reports that were saying, not really. So yeah, that also came up there. And then a very interesting question was about compensation for the GCC states for the damages that they suffered. Now, the context of this question was the person was asking him about the specifics of certain things that need to be agreed upon and why they're not in the MOU. And he started off kind of defensively saying, look, the MOU is not an all-encompassing document. It's just an outline. But then he gets into this issue of the compensation. So let me pull up that one now. Here's the next clip. Yeah.
not supposed to be like an all-encompassing document. It basically just creates the outlines for a negotiation process. And that's what the MOU did. I mean, it had some specific things about immediately reopening the straits and so forth, but what it ultimately does is create the outlines for a process of negotiation. Within that process, I imagine there'll be many things discussed. And on the specifics about the GCC, one of the things that was mentioned today, which is of great interest to them, is they want some sort of funding for reconstruction. They suffer damages. They want to be compensated for those damages. So I would imagine that as part of the MOU process and as part of their engagement with us in that process, that items such as that are going to come up. Okay?
Okay. Now, let's again read between the lines of what actually happened behind closed doors there. They're not interested in investing in Iran. They want to get paid by Iran. They want to get paid for the damages. And they, look, back up. What this meeting was about is that the Gulf states, I think, are very uncomfortable by what just went down over the last week and a half with this MOU, because they looked at it the way a lot of us looked at it and were like, what on earth is this? Where's the proxies? Where's the ballistic missiles? You see, they came up in that paragraph, in that top line paragraph in their joint statement today. Where's the proxies? Where's the militias? Where's the drones? Where's our compensation? You see, Rubio just shared that came up also. Where's our compensation? Oh, did investing in the reconstruction of Iran come up? Nope, that's too far in the distance. In other words, they're not interested in that either. It didn't even come up. No one ever mentioned it. You can, reading between the lines of what he's saying here and knowing what we know about the MOU, we can see that the Gulf states were not happy that they were not part of the process. They were not happy that their real concerns were not being addressed. That's what happened in Bahrain in this meeting. Next clip we're going to look at, we're almost done. We're going to look at a clip where he was asked about, sort of about regime change. He was asked about his previous comments that he's always been very hawkish on the Iranian leadership, being very quick to call them out as fanatics. And he was asked about that. So let's take a look at this one.
Oman. Very blunt terms to describe Iran's leadership. You used to call them, you did.
Yeah.
You used to call them religious theocratic lunatics. Do you still believe that language applies to the leadership today?
Well, look, it's not that I believe it, it's the fact of the matter. I mean, the Iranian system is led by clerics, radical clerics. That's what it's always been led by, and that's what it continues to be led by. That said, we also have to manage the geopolitics of the situation. And then there's if they've changed their mindset, or if they've changed their approach to their relations with the United States and their neighbors, then we're going to give this thing a chance to work. Maybe this changed. I'm not saying it has. I'm saying the president wants to explore whether that's the case. And if it has, we're going to find out. But we're not going to find out because of what they say. We're going to find out because of what they do. We're going to judge them by their actions. And we'll test that proposition and see. And no one says it's going to be easy, because I think at the end, you know, we know that people that are still at the top levels of that government are people that adhere to the same theology and the same mentality as the people that have led it in the past. They've got some people in the political branches that seem more flexible and more willing to work with us. Those are the ones we're negotiating with. We'll see how it works out.
You see that? Now, that is a very different tone from what we've been hearing from Vance and from President Trump himself, talking about, oh, there's been regime change. These are different people. They're far more reasonable. And he's coming out and saying, hey, look, these are the same people. These are the same people, and we don't know that they've changed. And it's refreshing to hear. Let's just say that. So what does President Trump actually believe, and what is kind of, you know, part of his posturing? That we don't know. Two more topics I want to touch on that he touched on. One of them is Lebanon. Now, I didn't include it in the proxy issue because it's a little bit different, but let's go over to the Lebanon issue now.
Okay.
He said that President Trump was sometimes frustrated because every time a deal between Israel and Lebanon was close, Israel would launch some sort of bomb that would kill a number of civilians in Beirut, and it didn't seem to be productive. A lot of Republicans thought that those comments were inappropriate.
He's talking about comments made by J.D. Vance criticizing Israel for gumming up the process by attacking Hezbollah.
In Congress. I mean, what do you think of those comments?
So one of the things that was happening, we actually have been able to do this. Last Friday, we restarted this monitoring mechanism that had gone dormant for a while. And what it does is CENTCOM is now sitting not just with the Israeli military command, but the Lebanese command. And anytime an incident happens, we're not taking anybody else's word for it. We can see the incident and we can quantify what actually happened. So as an example, yesterday, 2 individuals in some sort of vehicle, armed, clearly Lebanese Hezbollah fighters, approached an Israeli checkpoint and the Israelis actioned that item. A week ago, if that had happened, you would just have a news report that 2 people in Lebanon have been killed by the Israelis. Now we have fidelity that we actually know, not because they told us, but because we saw it. And we saw the footage that these were 2 armed individuals that were not a part of the Lebanese armed forces who approached the checkpoint and as a result posed a threat. So that's a big difference from what we were getting just a week ago. Beyond that, I would say that today is we're a few hours ahead here, but today will be the 3rd day of 3 days of talks between the Lebanese authorities and the Israeli authorities. I think we had a very good day yesterday. I think we are very close in our hopes of getting a commitment of interest of intent between the 2 countries that I think begin to outline a promising future. It'll be a process. It'll take some time. It'll take a lot of work. But I can tell you that for the first time in 30 years, the sovereign government of Lebanon is speaking to the government of Israel directly. That's who we're going to be negotiating with. That's who we're going to be working with, not Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not the government of Lebanon. Lebanon has a government. It has democratically elected leaders. They have the sovereign right to speak and defend the interests of the Lebanese people. And what we want for Lebanon is a peaceful future. That's what everyone wants here. And frankly, I think we're going to have a very positive commitment of interest, whether it's of intent, whether it's today or in the days to come. We're working very hard at that. Hopefully today will be a day that can build on some of the things we were able.
Okay, I found this a very interesting clip because of what he revealed about CENTCOM now having this monitoring mechanism where they're actually watching everything going on in Lebanon. And the example that he gave was of Hezbollah guys approaching Israeli soldiers and, some imminent threat and the Israelis taking them out. And that rather than it just being reported as, oh, Israel killed a few guys in Lebanon, they're seeing that Hezbollah provoked. So that's welcome. That's nice to see that they're monitoring that way. And then, of course, he reiterated that we're not dealing with Hezbollah. That's a bit of a problem. Look at the MOU. The MOU says that there's a deconfliction mechanism that involves Iran. But what's more, when J.D. Vance was speaking in Geneva after his visit there, and I played the clip in a previous video, right? He said explicitly that, this deconfliction, if someone launches a rocket and Israel responds, there'll be less escalation if everyone's talking. And he named in everyone talking, the Israelis and Hezbollah and Lebanon and, everyone should be in the conversation, including Hezbollah in the conversation for those deconflicting. So we're seeing a little bit of some daylight perhaps between Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. Maybe that's what we're seeing. And that's what the media was picking up on. So towards the end of this press conference, he was asked directly about that. And this is going to be the last clip that we play. Okay, so he's going to be asked about daylight between him and Vice President J.D. Vance.
Let's just put a fine point on this question. How wide is the divide between you and the Vice President?
On what issue?
On any issue.
This administration,
Iran
let me tell you something. Everyone here is aligned behind the President of the United States, every single one of us. The President of the United States makes the foreign policy of our country. And our job, we obviously give advice, we give counsel, we give opinions, but when the President of the United States is the one who is elected by the people of our country to conduct our foreign policy, the President makes these decisions, and all of us on his team, every single one of us works in lockstep very closely with one another to execute on the President's foreign policy. Everything we do is because the President's made a decision that it's going to be done. And one of the things I'm very proud of, I can't speak for every element of our government because I'm not involved in other aspects of our government, but one of the things that I'm the proudest of is that when it comes to foreign policy and national security, we have no drama, we have no games. We have a group of people that work very well together and closely to execute on the President's directives, which is why I think we've had good outcomes and good achievements, and we're going to continue to have good outcomes and good achievements. Everyone has an important role to play, and everyone is playing that role and doing it in a collaborative process. And I think that serves the President well, and I think that serves the country well.
All right. Listen, folks, he said what he said, but at the same time, we've seen gaps. We've seen a different tone coming out of J.D. Vance and coming out of Marco Rubio. Let's sum this up and end this video. He goes to the GCC. He sits down with the Kuwaitis, the Omanis, the Bahrainis, and the Qataris and the Saudis, and meaning they're all there. And you can read between the lines. They're not happy. They're not happy that they were cut out of the process, that there was no communication and no coordination with them on this MOU. They're not happy that the proxies weren't mentioned, that the ballistic missiles weren't mentioned. They're not interested in paying any money to Iran, but they are interested in getting paid money from Iran. They, in their document, without calling them by name, they basically say we have to get rid of Hezbollah. There were some very positive things that came out of Rubio's meeting in Bahrain. And let's not forget this question that I have, which is Rubio, and not a question, an observation, that Rubio is saying that these things are going to be part of the conversations going forward with the Iranians, ballistic missiles, proxies. He said that. He said these will be part of the conversations with Iran. Iran says, no, they're not, and they're not in the MOU. So this is another point of friction that we can expect to come to a head. What is the actual position of President Trump? Is it more like what Vance is saying? Oh, yeah, we could talk to Hezbollah and that could de-escalate. Or Rubio saying, we're not talking to Hezbollah, we're not involving them. These are the questions that we're going to have going forward. But I think that this was significant. One of the most significant things was that we finally have Secretary of State Rubio returning to the main stage of this drama. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Bye-bye.